She didn't replace you because she found someone better. She replaced you because she couldn't handle being alone with her own emotions. And what you do next will decide everything. Most people see a replacement and immediately assume the worst. They think she found someone better than me or I wasn't enough. But that assumption is exactly what destroys your confidence and puts you in a losing position. Because the truth is, when someone jumps into something new too quickly, it's rarely about deep connection. It's about escape. It's about distraction. It's about filling a space that suddenly feels empty. When a relationship ends, there's a void. And not everyone has the emotional strength to sit in that silence and face it. Some people need immediate validation, they need attention, reassurance, and the feeling that they're still desired. So instead of processing the loss, they replace it. Not because the new person is better, but because the feeling of being wanted again is comforting. That's why rebounds often move fast. There's intensity, excitement, and a sense of urgency, but it's not built on something solid. It's built on emotion, on impulse, on the need to feel okay again. And when something starts from that place, it's unstable by nature. It's like building on weak ground. It might look good at first, but it doesn't take long before cracks start to show. What you have to understand is this: her choice to replace you says more about her emotional state than it does about your value. It reflects how she handles discomfort, how she deals with endings, and how she seeks validation. It's not a measurement of your worth, it's a reaction to her own internal struggle. But here's where most men go wrong: they take it personally and react emotionally. They try to compete, they try to prove themselves. They think if they just show more effort, more love, more persistence, they can win her back. But all that does is confirm the very thing you don't want. It shows that you're shaken, that you're affected, that your confidence depends on her choices. And the moment you start chasing, you lower your value in her eyes, because now, instead of being the man she lost, you become the man trying to be chosen again. That shift changes everything. The reality is, you don't need to compete with a rebound. You don't need to prove anything, because something built on emotional escape cannot compare to something that was real. Time always exposes the difference. And when that happens, the way you handled yourself becomes the only thing that matters. So instead of seeing her replacement as a loss, start seeing it for what it really is: a temporary solution to a deeper problem. And the stronger you remain, the clearer that truth becomes, because in the end, it was never about someone being better than you. The moment she replaces you, it feels like everything is out of your control. Your mind starts racing, your emotions take over, and the first instinct is to react, to text her, to ask questions, to figure out what went wrong. But what most men don't realize is that this exact moment is where your value is being defined, not by what she does, but by how you respond, because whether you see it or not, she's paying attention. Maybe not directly, maybe not through messages, but through what she hears, what she senses, or even what she expects from you. She knows your patterns, she knows how you felt about her, and deep down, she has an idea of how you're going to react. That's the unspoken test. If you chase, you confirm everything she assumed. You show that you're emotionally dependent, that her actions control your state of mind, that you're willing to lower yourself just to keep her. And once that image is set, it's hard to change. Because attraction doesn't grow from someone trying to hold on. It grows from someone who can stand strong, even when things fall apart. On the other hand, when you don't react the way she expected, everything shifts. When you don't text, don't argue, don't try to compete with the new guy, you create uncertainty. Now, she doesn't know what you're thinking. She doesn't know if you've moved on, if you've changed, or if you even care anymore. And that uncertainty starts working in your favor. Silence in this situation isn't weakness, it's control. It shows emotional discipline. It shows that you're not ruled by impulse or insecurity. And that's rare, because most people react emotionally when they feel replaced. They try to regain control through action. But real control comes from restraint. Your reaction becomes your message. Without saying a single word, you communicate how you see yourself. If you chase, your actions say, I need you. But if you step back and focus on your own life, your actions say, I choose myself. And that difference is everything. This is why two men can go through the exact same situation and get completely different outcomes. One loses respect and attraction because he reacts emotionally. The other gains respect because he remains grounded, composed, and unaffected. Not because he doesn't care, but because he values himself enough not to chase someone who walked away. And here's the deeper truth: people don't just remember how you made them feel when things were good, they remember how you handled things when everything went wrong. That's where your character shows, that's where your strength is revealed. So when she replaces you, don't focus on her decision, focus on your response, because that's the part you control. And that's the part that determines whether you lose your value or prove it without saying a word. Because in the end, it's not her choice that defines you, it's your reaction to it. Most people think the moment someone replaces you, the game is over, that you've lost, that they've moved on, and now you have to fight to get back what you had. But what they don't realize is that this is actually the moment where the dynamic can completely shift depending on what you do next. Because when she moves on quickly, there's often an unspoken expectation behind it. She expects you to react. She expects you to feel threatened. She expects you to chase, to question, to try to win her back. Not always consciously, but it's there. It's human nature. When someone knows you were invested, they assume you'll try to hold on. And that's where most men fall right into the trap. They play the role that's expected of them. They become emotional, reactive, and desperate for answers. They try to prove their worth in comparison to someone new. But the moment you step into that role, you give up your power. You're no longer choosing, you're competing. But when you do the opposite, when you walk away instead of stepping forward, everything changes. You break the pattern. You remove yourself from the situation entirely. And that's something she didn't prepare for, because now, instead of having control over your reaction, she's left with questions. Why didn't he chase? Why didn't he react? Why does it seem like he's unaffected? That silence creates a kind of tension that no words ever could. It forces her to think about you in a different way. Not as someone who's trying to get her back, but as someone who chose to leave the situation with dignity. And that kind of behavior stands out, especially in a world where most people act on impulse. Walking away also shifts the emotional weight. When you stay in chase, you carry all the pressure. You're the one trying to fix things, trying to reconnect, trying to make something happen. But when you leave, that pressure disappears from you, and it doesn't just vanish, it transfers. Now she's the one who has to sit with the decision. Now she's the one who has to wonder. And the more time passes, the more that shift becomes noticeable. Because without your presence, without your attention, without your effort, the situation becomes clearer. The new connection she jumped into doesn't have you in the background anymore. There's no comparison being avoided. There's no emotional safety net. It's just her and the reality of her choice. And that's when something starts to change internally. Not instantly, not dramatically, but subtly. She begins to realize that you didn't try to compete, you didn't try to convince, you simply stepped away. And that kind of response carries a message of strength that words can't replicate. You didn't need to fight for your position. You didn't need to prove your worth. You showed it by refusing to lower yourself into a situation where you had to compete for attention, because, in the end, the strongest move isn't trying to win the game, it's choosing not to play it at all. At first, the new person always seems better. Everything feels fresh, exciting, and effortless. There's no history, no past arguments, no emotional weight. It's just new energy, new conversations, and the illusion of something better. And from the outside, it can look like you've been completely replaced by someone who offers more. But that's only because you're seeing the beginning of something that hasn't been tested yet. Every new connection feels easy in the early stages. People are on their best behavior. They say the right things, they hide their flaws, and they focus on creating a good impression. It's not real life, it's the highlight version. And when someone jumps into that right after leaving a relationship, it feels even more intense because it contrasts with the emotional heaviness they just escaped. But what most people don't understand is that comparison doesn't happen in the beginning, it happens over time. At first, there's no reason to compare because everything is surface level. But as days turn into weeks and weeks turn into months, reality starts to show up. Habits become visible, differences become clear. The same patterns that existed before begin to reappear in a different form. That's when the mind naturally starts to look back, not out of regret immediately, but out of curiosity. She begins to notice things that are missing. Maybe it's how you handled certain situations, how you made her feel, or the level of understanding that existed between you. These are things that can't be replaced instantly, no matter how good the new person seems at first. And here's the key: if you reacted emotionally, if you tried to compete, you weaken that comparison. Because now, instead of remembering you as strong and grounded, she remembers you as someone who lost control when things didn't go your way. That image sticks. It changes how she views you in contrast to the new situation. But if you handled yourself with composure, if you walked away without drama, without trying to prove anything, that's what stands out later. Because now, when comparison begins, you're remembered differently. You're remembered as someone who had self respect, someone who didn't beg, someone who didn't try to fight for attention. And that quiet strength becomes more noticeable over time. Replacements often feel right in the moment, but they don't always hold up under real life conditions. Because real connection isn't built on excitement alone, it's built on consistency, understanding, and depth. And those things take time to develop. They can't be rushed and they can't be faked for long. So while it may seem like she moved on to something better, what she really moved into is something untested. And when that test begins, the way you carried yourself becomes part of the equation. Because in the end, it's not about who came next, it's about who left a lasting impression. When you finally step back and go silent, it feels like you're losing control. No messages, no updates, no reactions. It's uncomfortable at first because you're used to being present, to being part of her daily attention. But what you don't realize is that this silence is where your real power begins. Because when you remove your presence completely, you create something that can't be ignored, a void. People underestimate the impact of absence. They think that if they're not constantly in someone's face, they'll be forgotten. But the opposite is often true. When you've shared real moments, real emotions, and real connection, your absence becomes noticeable. It creates a contrast, and that contrast is what makes someone reflect. When you were there, texting, calling, giving attention, it was easy for her to take it for granted. It became part of the routine, something expected. But the moment it's gone, that routine breaks. And now there's space where your presence used to be. That space doesn't stay empty, it gets filled with thoughts, memories, and questions. Silence forces reflection. Without your voice, without your energy, she's left with her own thoughts. She starts replaying moments, conversations, feelings, not because you're reminding her, but because your absence is. And that kind of reflection is far more powerful than anything you could say through a message. At the same time, silence removes emotional access. She can't check in on you. She can't see how you're feeling. She doesn't know if you're moving on, if you've changed, or if you've completely detached. That uncertainty creates curiosity. And curiosity is one of the strongest drivers of attraction because now, instead of you thinking about her all the time, she starts thinking about you. This is where most men sabotage themselves. They break the silence too early. They send that just checking in message, hoping to reconnect. But what they don't realize is that they interrupt the very process that was working in their favor. They fill the space before it has a chance to grow. And once they do that, the mystery disappears again. Silence only works when it's consistent, when it's real, not as a tactic, but as a decision to focus on your own life. When you're genuinely not reaching out, not react, not trying to stay connected, your energy shifts. You become less available, less predictable, and more focused. And that shift is felt even without communication. The absence you create becomes meaningful because it's backed by self respect. You're not silent to manipulate, you're silent because you're no longer chasing. And that difference is what makes it powerful. Over time, that silence becomes louder than anything you could say. It makes her feel your absence, question her decision, and reflect on what was lost. Not because you told her to, because you gave her the space to realize it on her own, because in the end, your absence speaks louder than your words ever could. At some point, you have to understand this clearly. You didn't lose. It might feel like you did in the beginning. Seeing her with someone else, watching her move on, feeling like you've been replaced, it hits your ego, your emotions, your sense of worth. But all of that is temporary, and more importantly, it's based on perception, not reality. Because winning in this situation was never about keeping her, it was about how you handled yourself when things fell apart. Most people measure success by outcomes. Did she stay? Did she come back? Did the relationship continue? But that way of thinking puts your value in someone else's hands. It makes your worth dependent on their choice. And the moment you do that, you lose control over how you see yourself. The real win is internal. It's in the way you responded when you had every reason to react emotionally. It's in the fact that you didn't chase, didn't beg, didn't try to compete for attention. You chose to walk away even when it was difficult. And that choice reflects something deeper than attraction. It reflects self respect. Walking away sends a message, not just to her, but to yourself. It tells you that you're not willing to stay in a situation where you're not valued the same way. It tells you that your time, your energy, and your presence are not things you give away just to keep someone around. And once you truly understand that, your entire mindset shifts. You stop seeing rejection as loss. You start seeing it as redirection. You stop trying to hold on to people who are uncertain about you. You start focusing on becoming someone who doesn't need validation to feel complete. And that's where real confidence is built, not from being chosen, but from choosing yourself. And here's the part most people don't realize: this mindset is rare. Most people react emotionally. They try to hold on to fix, to prove. But when you don't follow that pattern, you stand out. You become different. And that difference is what creates respect, even from someone who walked away. Because now, when she thinks about you, she doesn't remember someone who chased her or tried to compete. She remembers someone who had the strength to walk away quietly, someone who didn't need to prove anything, someone who knew their worth without needing it to be validated. Whether she comes back or not becomes irrelevant at that point, because you've already gained something more valuable than any relationship. You've gained control over yourself, your emotions, your decisions, your standards. And once you have that, you don't operate from fear anymore. You don't chase, you don't beg, you don't settle, you simply choose. And that's why, in the end, you didn't lose anything. You proved your worth in the only way that actually matters.